Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. February morning in 2018, and I was 17. Junior year at Westfield High in suburban Illinois. I remember that Monday specifically because I'd gotten to school early to finish my chemistry lab report in the library before first period. My dad had dropped me off at 7:15, 45 minutes before classes started, and the building was still pretty empty except for a few teachers setting up their rooms and the janitor, Mr. Garrett, pushing his squeaky cart down the main hallway. I was one of those kids who actually liked school, never got into trouble, played clarinet in the band, and spent most weekends either studying or hanging out with my small group of friends at the local diner. Nothing exciting ever happened in our town of 8,000 people, where the biggest news was usually about the high school football team or someone's prize-winning pumpkin at the county fair. First period was AP History with Mrs. Thompson, and I'd just settled into my seat near the windows when the announcement came over the intercom at 8:03 a.m. Principal Anderson's voice, but different from his usual morning announcements tone. Tight, controlled, like he was reading from a script while trying not to panic. Attention all students and staff, we are now in lockdown. This is not a drill. Teachers, please follow lockdown procedures immediately. Mrs. Thompson's face went white as printer paper, and she practically dove for the door, yanking it shut and twisting the lock so hard I thought the handle might break off. She grabbed the red emergency folder from her desk, pulled out the magnetic black strip that covered the door's narrow window, and started herding all 22 of us to the back corner of the room, away from the windows and door. We crammed ourselves between the bookshelf and the filing cabinet, some kids sitting, others crouching, everyone trying to make themselves as small as possible, while Mrs. Thompson turned off the lights and joined us in that corner, her phone already in her hand, probably texting her own kids at the middle school across town. The first 5 minutes were just confused silence, everyone exchanging glances, some kids pulling out their phones despite the no-phone policy, trying to text their parents or check social media for any information. Jake Sullivan, who sat next to me in calculus, was breathing so hard, I worried he might hyperventilate. And Ashley Brennan kept whispering prayers under her breath, clutching the small cross necklace she always wore. Then we heard it. Footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, not like a student running late or a teacher's quick pace between classrooms. These footsteps would take 3 or 4 steps, then stop, and we'd hear a doorknob rattle, metal against metal, like someone was testing each door. The sound got closer to our classroom, and Mrs. Thompson put her finger to her lips even though none of us were making a sound anymore, everyone holding their breath like if we breathed too loud, whoever was out there might hear us through the walls. When the footsteps stopped right outside our door, I could see the shadow of feet in the thin gap underneath, just standing there, not moving. The doorknob turned slowly, once to the right, back to center, then harder to the right again, and the whole door shook in its frame when whoever it was pulled on it, testing if it was really locked. Nathan Cross, the kid who usually cracked jokes in every class, had tears streaming down his face, and I realized I was digging my fingernails so hard into my palms that they'd leave marks for hours afterward. The person outside our door tried the handle 2 more times, each pull more aggressive than the last, and then we heard him speak. Not yelling, just a normal conversational volume, which somehow made it worse. I know you're in there. These doors, they're not that strong, you know. I used to go here, I remember this room. His voice was young, maybe mid-20s, with this casual tone like he was talking about the weather, not standing outside a locked classroom with terrified kids inside. He stayed there for what felt like an hour but was probably only 30 seconds, and then we heard something metallic scraping against the door, like he was running something along the wood. Room 237, he said, reading the number on our door. Yeah, this was Mr. Peterson's room when I was here. Is he still teaching? Probably retired by now. Lucky him. The scraping sound continued, and through the tiny gap under the door, I could see he'd shifted his weight, one foot tapping against the floor in some rhythm only he could hear. Then, just as suddenly as he'd arrived, he walked away. Those same measured footsteps heading further down the hall, and we heard him try the next door, then the next. Somewhere in the distance, maybe from the science wing, we heard glass breaking, followed by a scream that cut off abruptly, and Mrs. Thompson started typing frantically on her phone, probably messaging the principal or calling 911, though her hands were trembling so badly she had to retype everything twice. About 10 minutes passed with sporadic sounds, doors rattling, occasional footsteps running, students or teachers we couldn't tell, and twice we heard the intruder's voice echoing from different parts of the building, though we couldn't make out the words. Then the fire alarm went off, that piercing electronic shriek that usually meant we'd file outside in orderly lines for a drill. But Mrs. Thompson grabbed Tommy Wagner's arm when he started to stand up, shaking her head violently. "No, no, no, we stay put," she whispered. "In a lockdown, we ignore fire alarms. Could be him trying to get us into the halls." That's when the reality hit me hardest. This person, whoever he was, had actually thought about how to get us out of our hiding spots, like he'd planned this, studied our procedures. The alarm blared for maybe 3 minutes before shutting off, leaving this eerie silence that was somehow worse than the noise. During that quiet, we heard sirens approaching, lots of them, getting louder and louder until it sounded like every cop car in the county was pulling into our parking lot. The intruder must have heard the sirens too, because his footsteps changed pattern, no longer methodical but running, and we heard him pass by our door again, this time heading toward the main entrance. "They're here. They're finally here," he called out, his voice carrying this weird excitement like a kid on Christmas morning. Took them 18 minutes. Not bad for this town. Then came sounds of furniture being dragged across floors, probably barricading himself somewhere. And we heard several classroom doors suddenly opening. Students who'd been hiding were trying to escape now that they heard the police. Thompson stood up slightly, pressing her ear to our door, trying to decide if we should make a run for it too. But then came the sound that made everyone in our corner huddle closer. 3 loud bangs from the main entrance, like someone hitting the doors with a battering ram, followed by dozens of voices shouting commands, though the words were all jumbled together in the chaos. Everything exploded into noise after that. Boots thundering through hallways, officers yelling clear from different rooms, more glass breaking, and then a single gunshot that made everyone in our room jump, followed by more shouting that we couldn't understand. A girl named Bethany started sobbing uncontrollably, and Mrs. Thompson crawled over to hold her, rocking her back and forth while still keeping us all pressed into that corner. We could hear officers getting closer to our wing, their voices becoming clearer. "Hands up, let me see your hands. And get on the ground now." Mixed in with all the police commands, we could still hear the intruder somewhere, laughing. Not maniacal or crazy, just laughing like someone had told him a really good joke. The laughing moved around the building as he apparently led them on some kind of chase, and at one point, it sounded like he was right above us, like he'd gotten into the ceiling tiles or the second floor, because we could hear muffled footsteps and dust fell from one of our ceiling panels. Then suddenly, he was back at our door, but this time he wasn't alone. We could hear officers right behind him, their equipment jangling, radios crackling with static and codes. "Room 237 again," he said, breathing hard now. "Full circle, right? That's poetic." He kicked our door once, hard enough that the whole frame shook, and a piece of the door's veneer actually cracked and fell off on our side. Through that fresh crack, I could see a sliver of the hallway. Fluorescent lights, a water fountain, and just for a second, part of his face as he leaned close to the door. He had this perfectly normal appearance, clean-shaven, short brown hair. Could have been anybody's older brother or the guy who makes your coffee at the local shop. "You kids in there," he said, his mouth close to the crack. "Remember this feeling. This exact feeling right now. That's what being alive really feels like." Before anyone could process what he meant, the officers tackled him, and we heard the struggle. Bodies hitting lockers, someone grunting, handcuffs clicking, and then one officer saying, Got him, suspect in custody. We need medics in the science wing now. An officer knocked on our door about 5 minutes later, identifying himself as Sergeant Fuller with the state police, asking Mrs. Thompson to slowly unlock the door and step back. When she finally opened it, we saw the hallway was full of officers in tactical gear, some with rifles, others checking each room systematically. They had us exit in a single-file line with our hands visible, which felt surreal after hiding for what turned out to be 43 minutes total. As we walked toward the main entrance, I saw things that didn't make sense until later. A fire extinguisher discharged in the middle of the hall, leaving white powder everywhere, someone's abandoned backpack with papers scattered around it, and strangest of all, a line of books placed perfectly straight across one hallway intersection, like he'd taken them from the library and created some kind of barrier or message. The science wing was blocked off with yellow tape, and they redirected us through the gym to get outside, where hundreds of parents were already gathered behind police barriers, some crying, others on their phones, all of them searching the crowds of students for their kids. My dad found me near the buses, and he hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, his whole body shaking even though he was trying to be strong. We stood there for probably 10 minutes while the police processed everyone, taking brief statements, checking if anyone was physically hurt, and gradually releasing students to their families. I found out later that the intruder was named Christopher Vaughn, 24 years old, graduated from our school 6 years earlier, and had been struggling with untreated schizophrenia that his family didn't even know about. He'd entered through the side door near the wood shop, which was supposed to be locked, but the mechanism had been broken for weeks. Something about budget cuts preventing the repair. The weapon he'd been carrying turned out to be a modified pneumatic nail gun from his construction job, and he'd fired it once in the science wing, hitting a periodic table poster while the room was empty, because Mr. Douglas had taken his students to the computer lab 30 seconds before Vaughn got there. Nobody was physically hurt that day, which the news called a miracle, though I know plenty of us were changed in ways that don't show up in police reports. School was closed for 3 days while they investigated and installed new security measures, metal detectors, automatic locking mechanisms on all doors, panic buttons in every classroom, and 2 full-time resource officers instead of just 1. When we came back that Thursday, everything looked the same but felt completely different, like the building itself remembered what happened. I still finished high school there, even got into a decent college, and now I'm 26 working as a pharmacy tech in Colorado, far from that town. But sometimes when I hear footsteps in an empty hallway at work, or when someone tries a locked door, my body remembers exactly how it felt crammed in that corner, and I have to remind myself that it's over, that Christopher Vaughn is in a psychiatric facility that the door will hold. They say trauma fades with time, and maybe it does, but I think what really happens is you just learn to carry it better, like a backpack you can never quite take off but eventually stops feeling so heavy. Mrs. Thompson retired the year after I graduated, and someone told me she became a librarian at an elementary school 2 towns over, somewhere with better locks and quieter hallways. Last year was supposed to be just another regular junior year at Riverside High in Michigan. I was 16, juggling AP classes, volleyball practice, and my weekend shifts at the local bookstore downtown. Life felt predictable in that comfortable small-town way, where everyone knows everyone, and nothing truly bad ever seems to happen. My biggest worry was maintaining my GPA for college applications and saving enough money for a car. I lived with my mom and younger brother in a duplex near the school, and most days I'd walk the 15 minutes home after practice, sometimes stopping at the corner store for an energy drink. That September afternoon when I first noticed Oliver sitting alone in the cafeteria, reading some thick fantasy novel, while everyone else clustered in their usual groups, I thought I was just being kind by inviting him to sit with me and my friends. Oliver seemed grateful for the invitation, almost surprised that someone had noticed him at all. He was new to town, he explained. His family had moved from somewhere in Ohio because his dad got transferred to the automotive plant 40 minutes away. He wore these oversized band t-shirts I didn't recognize, had this habit of pushing his glasses up his nose every few minutes, and spoke so quietly you had to lean in to hear him properly. My friends thought he was a bit odd, but harmless enough, and I genuinely felt bad for him starting junior year without knowing anyone. We exchanged numbers that day, and he started sitting with us at lunch, mostly just listening to our conversations, occasionally laughing at our jokes but rarely contributing his own stories. I remember thinking he just needed time to come out of his shell, that maybe having a group of friends would help him adjust to the new school. The first couple of weeks seemed normal enough, or at least what I thought was normal for someone getting comfortable in a new environment. Oliver would text me occasionally, usually questions about homework, or asking what time we were meeting for lunch. He started showing up to my volleyball games, sitting alone in the bleachers with that same fantasy book, though I noticed he never actually turned the pages while the game was on. After one particularly close match against our rivals, he waited by the gym doors with a bottle of my favorite sports drink, the blue Powerade I always bought from the vending machine. I thought it was sweet, this awkward kid trying to be supportive, and my teammates even teased me about having such a devoted friend. But then came the morning I found a folded piece of notebook paper tucked into the side pocket of my backpack, which I always left in my unlocked locker during practice. The note had this weird poem about watching someone sleep, written in Oliver's distinctive cramped handwriting, and at the bottom he'd drawn these tiny stars around my name. I tried to convince myself the poem was just Oliver being socially awkward, maybe copying something he'd read online without realizing how it came across. When I gently told him the note made me uncomfortable, he apologized profusely, his face turning this blotchy red color, and promised he was just trying to be nice. For about a week, everything seemed to go back to normal. He even started eating lunch with some guys from his chemistry class instead. But then I began noticing his car, this faded green Saturn with a cracked windshield, parked across from my house when I got home from practice. The first time, I figured maybe he was visiting someone in the neighborhood, but after the fourth time in a week, always parked in slightly different spots but always with a clear view of our front door, I knew this wasn't a coincidence. My mom worked late shifts at the hospital, so I was usually home alone with my brother until almost midnight, and the thought of Oliver just sitting out there, watching, made me double-check every lock in the house. Everything escalated that Thursday in October, when I decided to take a different route home, cutting through the park behind the library instead of my usual path down Elm Avenue. About halfway through the park, near the old gazebo where kids go to smoke, I heard footsteps matching mine on the gravel path. When I sped up, they sped up. When I stopped to pretend to check my phone, they stopped too, maybe 20 feet behind me. I finally turned around and there was Oliver, carrying his backpack and that same fantasy novel, claiming he just happened to be walking this way to get to the public library, the library that had closed an hour earlier. His excuse fell apart immediately, and when I confronted him about following me, he started this rapid-fire explanation about how he just wanted to make sure I got home safe, that he'd heard some seniors talking about bothering me, that he was protecting me. The way he said protecting made my skin prickle, like he genuinely believed he was some kind of guardian I'd never asked for. That night I blocked him on everything: Instagram, Snapchat, even removed him from my contacts. I told my friends what was happening, and they formed this protective barrier around me at school, making sure I was never alone in the hallways. For 3 days, Oliver seemed to get the message, keeping his distance, eating lunch in the library, avoiding eye contact when we passed in the halls. I started to relax, thinking maybe the situation would just fade away. Then Saturday came, and I was working my usual afternoon shift at the bookstore, arranging a new display of Halloween decorations near the front window. When I looked up, Oliver was standing on the sidewalk outside, just staring through the glass. Not browsing, not pretending to window shop, just standing there with his hands in his pockets watching me work. My manager, Mrs. Caldwell, noticed my reaction and asked if everything was okay, and when I explained, she immediately went outside to tell him to leave. He walked away without arguing, but 2 hours later he was back, this time sitting on the bench across the street with a clear view into the store. Mrs. Caldwell called the police that afternoon, and while we waited for them to arrive, she locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed, even though we had another hour until actual closing time. Oliver never moved from that bench, just sat there reading his book or pretending to read it, glancing up every few seconds to check if I was still there. When Officer Ramirez arrived, she took my statement in the back office while her partner went to talk to Oliver. I could see them through the window, Oliver gesturing wildly, pointing at the store, shaking his head repeatedly. The officer came back and told us Oliver claimed he was just enjoying the nice weather and reading, that it was a public bench and he wasn't breaking any laws. Technically, he was right, which made everything worse. Officer Ramirez gave me her card and told me to document everything, to save any messages or notes, and to call immediately if he made any direct contact or threats. She said without more concrete evidence of harassment or a direct threat, their hands were tied. Monday morning, I walked into school to find my locker door slightly open, even though I distinctly remembered locking it on Friday. Inside, arranged carefully on top of my textbooks, were 17 printed photos of me. Not old photos from social media, but recent ones. Me walking out of my house that morning, me at work through the bookstore window, me in the park from different angles, even one of me through my bedroom window with the curtains partially open. Each photo had a timestamp in the corner, some dating back weeks. At the bottom of the stack was a handwritten letter, 3 pages long, describing in detail how Oliver had been documenting our journey and how he knew I'd blocked him because I was scared of how perfect we could be together. The letter ended with him saying he understood I needed time, but that he'd wait for me, that he'd always be nearby, watching, making sure I was safe from everyone else who didn't deserve me. My first period teacher found me hyperventilating in the hallway, clutching those photos, unable to form coherent sentences. The principal, Mr. Howard, immediately called the police again, and this time they had enough evidence to act. The school went into a modified lockdown while they searched for Oliver, who hadn't shown up for his morning classes. They found him in the parking lot, sitting in his car with what they described as a shrine on his dashboard. More photos of me, hair ties he'd somehow collected, even a copy of my class schedule with certain periods highlighted in yellow. When they searched his backpack, they found a journal filled with entries about me dating back to our first conversation, pages and pages of fabricated conversations we'd never had, future plans he'd imagined for us, and disturbingly detailed descriptions of what I wore each day and who I talked to. The police arrested him right there in the parking lot, and I watched from the principal's office window as they put him in handcuffs, his face completely calm, almost serene, like he'd been expecting this moment. The rest of that day blurred together in a series of phone calls, paperwork, and meetings. My mom left work immediately and arrived at school looking more terrified than I'd ever seen her, gripping my shoulders and checking me over like she expected to find physical injuries. The detective assigned to the case, a woman named Detective Santos with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, walked us through the process of getting a restraining order. She explained that Oliver would likely be charged with stalking, harassment, and breaking and entering for accessing my locker. The school changed my locker combination and offered to adjust my schedule so I wouldn't have to walk past Oliver's usual spots, even though he wouldn't be returning. What really disturbed me was when Detective Santos mentioned they'd found evidence on Oliver's phone, that he'd been researching my family, had screenshots of my mom's work schedule from the hospital's public website, and had been tracking my brother's middle school soccer practices. Oliver's parents showed up at our house that evening, which nobody expected. His mother stood on our porch crying, holding a casserole dish like this was some kind of normal neighborly visit, while his father kept apologizing and insisting they had no idea their son was troubled. They seemed genuinely shocked, these two ordinary-looking people in their business casual clothes, trying to make sense of how their quiet son had become someone who terrorized a teenage girl. His mother kept saying Oliver was just lonely, that he'd never had many friends, that moving had been hard on him. I wanted to feel sorry for them, but all I could think about were those photos taken through my bedroom window. My mom politely but firmly told them to leave and not contact us again, that everything would go through lawyers from now on. As they walked back to their car, Oliver's father turned and said something that stuck with me. He said Oliver had been hospitalized twice before for similar misunderstandings at his previous school, but they'd hoped a fresh start would help. They'd known he had problems and still let him loose in a new place without proper help or supervision. The legal process moved surprisingly fast after that. Oliver ended up taking a plea deal that included mandatory psychiatric treatment, 2 years of probation, and a permanent restraining order that extended to my entire family. He had to transfer to an alternative school in the next county and wear an ankle monitor. His family moved away by December, and I heard from Detective Santos that he'd been placed in a residential treatment facility after violating his probation by trying to create fake social media accounts to contact me. Even now, months later, I still check parking lots for green Saturns, still feel my chest tighten when I see someone reading alone in the cafeteria, and I haven't been able to bring myself to use that locker again, even with the new combination. The school installed better security cameras and started requiring ID badges, changes that came too late for me but might protect someone else. I guess the strangest part is that I still sometimes wonder if I could have handled things differently at the beginning, if I could have seen the warning signs more clearly, even though my therapist keeps reminding me that being kind to a lonely kid shouldn't result in being stalked, and that Oliver's actions were never my responsibility to prevent or predict. The afternoon everything went sideways at my school started like any other Thursday in late September. I was 17, a junior at Northbrook Academy in Pennsylvania, spending most of my free periods in the library working on college applications and trying to maintain my GPA. My dad had been laid off from the steel plant that spring, and my mom was pulling double shifts at the hospital, so getting a scholarship wasn't just important, it was everything. That Thursday, though, I had study hall third period, and instead of heading to the library like usual, I decided to hang out in the chemistry lab to finish up a lab report. Mr. Harrison, our regular chemistry teacher, had been out for 3 weeks recovering from surgery, and we'd had this substitute, Mr. Daniels, covering his classes since the beginning of the month. Mr. Daniels was the kind of teacher everyone immediately liked, mid-30s, wore these vintage band t-shirts under his blazers, knew every student's name by the second day, and actually made stoichiometry interesting. He'd bring in these weird demonstrations, like making foam explosions that reached the ceiling, or creating this purple flame that danced across the lab bench without burning anything. The guy had this energy that made you want to pay attention, cracking jokes about noble gases being too stuck up to bond with anyone. Stuff that shouldn't be funny but somehow was when he said it. But I'd noticed something the previous week while staying late to clean up after a particularly messy titration experiment. Mr. Daniels had been walking down the hall carrying this heavy-looking duffel bag, and instead of heading to the parking lot, he'd taken a sharp turn toward the old maintenance wing where they kept the boiler room and electrical panels. That Thursday morning, I was sitting in the back of the chemistry lab, trying to concentrate on balancing equations, when I heard this metallic scraping sound coming from the storage closet. Mr. Daniels was in there, supposedly organizing supplies for next period's freshman class, but the noise went on for like 20 minutes straight. Through the narrow window in the door, I could see him kneeling behind the chemical cabinet, and it looked like he was prying up one of the floor tiles with something sharp. When he finally came out, there was concrete dust on his pants, and he had this red mark across his palm like he'd been gripping something too hard. He smiled at everyone, made some joke about the closet being messier than a teenager's bedroom, but his eyes kept darting to the clock above the whiteboard, and he checked his phone at least 6 times in the next 10 minutes. During lunch, I told my friend Mia about the weird stuff I'd been noticing, and she said she'd seen Mr. Daniels in the north stairwell the day before, talking on his phone in this intense whisper. She couldn't make out most of it, but she swore she heard him say something about tomorrow at 2:15 and the second phase. We both agreed it was probably nothing. Maybe he was going through a divorce or had some family drama. But then Mia mentioned that her cousin who graduated last year said Northbrook Academy had never had a long-term sub named Daniels before, which was strange because Mr. Daniels had told everyone he'd been subbing in the district for 5 years. The whole thing was starting to feel weird, like when you're watching a movie and you can tell something bad is about to happen, but you don't know what yet. At 2:10 that afternoon, I was in the bathroom on the second floor when the announcement came over the intercom. Principal Morrison's voice, but different, tight and controlled like she was reading from a script while someone held a gun to her head. Attention all students and staff. We are initiating a lockdown. This is not a drill. Teachers, please secure your classrooms immediately. The way she said immediately stretched out too long, like she was trying to tell us something without saying it. I ran back to my history class and Mr. Coleman was already pulling down the blinds and turning off the lights. Everyone was cramming into the corner away from the door, and this freshman girl named Haley was crying quietly into her sleeve. We could hear footsteps running in the hallway, doors slamming, and then this weird silence that was somehow louder than all the noise had been. About 5 minutes into the lockdown, we heard movement in the ceiling. Not like mice or squirrels. Deliberate, heavy shifting sounds like someone crawling through the air ducts. The tiles above us were those cheap foam ones that you could push up easily, and I remembered seeing Mr. Daniels standing on a desk the week before, supposedly adjusting the air conditioning vent, but now I wondered what he'd really been doing up there. Then we heard voices, muffled but definitely human, coming from somewhere above us. One voice was giving directions. Third room from the stairwell. Check the connecting passage, stuff like that. The other voice was responding with what sounded like confirmation codes, and I swear to God the second voice sounded exactly like Mr. A. Daniels, except colder, more focused, like he'd dropped the friendly teacher act completely. Mr. Coleman was pressed against the wall, holding his phone with the screen, brightness turned all the way down, texting someone frantically. Through the transom window above our door, that little rectangular window that nobody ever thinks about, I could see shadows moving in the hallway. Not normal walking shadows, but low, creeping movements like someone trying to stay below the sight lines of the door windows. Then came this soft clicking sound, rhythmic and mechanical, like someone testing door handles one by one. Our door handle jiggled, and everyone in the room stopped breathing at the same time. The handle turned slowly, testing the lock, and then we heard Mr. Daniels' voice, clear as day. This one's secured. Mark it and move to the next sector. Another voice, deeper and unfamiliar, responded, Copy that. The package should be in the administrative wing. We have 7 minutes before response arrives. The footsteps moved away, but then we heard a crash from somewhere down the hall, followed by running and shouting. Someone yelled, He's going for the server room, and suddenly there were way more footsteps than before, all moving fast toward the main office. That's when things got really insane. The fire alarm started going off, but in this weird pattern, not the normal steady blare, but these short bursts like someone was manually triggering it. Mr. Coleman whispered that we needed to stay put, that this could be a trick to get everyone into the hallways. And he was right, because seconds later we heard Mr. Daniels on what must have been a walkie-talkie saying, Negative on the evacuation. They're not taking the bait. Proceed to contingency. The girl next to me, Janet, grabbed my arm so hard she left bruises, and I could feel her whole body shaking against mine. Through the chaos of alarms and footsteps, we heard police sirens approaching, lots of them, getting louder by the second. The voices in the ceiling suddenly became urgent, angry. Abort, abort, they're here too early, someone hissed, and then Mr. Daniels' voice cut through, sharp and commanding. Negative, we stick to the plan. I've got the access codes. 60 seconds to the mainframe. That's when I realized what they were after. Our school had just upgraded their whole system last year, and there were rumors that they'd connected it to the district's central database, which had everything from student records to security protocols for all 12 schools in the area. If someone got into that, they'd have personal information on thousands of kids, building layouts, schedule patterns, everything you'd need to plan something horrible on a massive scale. The next few minutes felt like hours compressed into heartbeats. We heard glass breaking, definitely from the main office area, and then this electronic beeping that got faster and faster until it was just one continuous tone. Mr. Coleman's phone lit up with texts from other teachers. They're in the principal's office, 2 men with bags. Daniels is at the computer. Then came the sound that still wakes me up sometimes. Tactical boots, the heavy kind with steel reinforcement, running down our hallway, and a voice booming, "Police! Everybody stay in your rooms!" The boots stopped right outside our door, and we heard radio chatter. "Suspect heading north, 2nd floor. Cut him off at the science wing. We need the bomb squad for the devices in the basement." Devices, plural. In the basement where Mr. Daniels had been going with those duffel bags. Everything erupted at once. We heard shouting, a struggle, something heavy hitting the lockers, and then Mr. Daniels' voice, but screaming now, "You don't understand what you're stopping. They need to know. Everyone needs to know what's in those files." More struggling, the sharp click of handcuffs, and another voice, the deep one from before, yelling something about constitutional rights and government overreach. The police radios went crazy with updates. 2 in custody. Sweep the ceiling spaces. EOD team entering the basement now. 20 minutes later, though it felt like a lifetime, an officer knocked on our door with a specific pattern Mr. Coleman must have been told about, because only then did he unlock it. They evacuated us in groups, hands on our heads, through hallways that looked like a war zone. Ceiling tiles scattered everywhere, the principal's office door hanging off its hinges, and long scratches on the walls where someone had been dragged while fighting. The truth came out over the following weeks, mostly through news reports and what our parents heard from other parents who knew people in the police department. Mr. Daniels wasn't even his real name. He was some guy named Robert Hutchinson, who'd been part of this extremist group that believed the government was using school databases to track and profile kids for some future surveillance state. They'd planted devices, not bombs, thank God, but some kind of data harvesting equipment, throughout the school to copy everything that went through our servers. The other guy was his brother-in-law, who'd been hiding in the building since the night before, living in the ceiling spaces and maintenance areas that Mr. Daniels had mapped out during his 3 weeks as our substitute. They'd picked our school because of that new district connection, planning to download everything and release it online to expose what they thought was happening. The FBI got involved, found out they'd done similar infiltrations at 2 other schools in different states. Mr. Daniels, or Robert, whatever, got 15 years. We never did find out what happened to our real substitute teacher who was supposed to cover for Mr. Harrison. Some kids joked that maybe he was tied up in Robert's basement somewhere, but honestly, nobody wanted to think too hard about that possibility. The smell hit me first that morning in October 2017. Not the usual mix of floor wax and cafeteria food, but something sharp and metallic that made my nose burn. I was 17, a junior at Riverside Academy in Nevada, and chemistry was my first period class with Mr. Brennan. He'd been teaching there for about 6 years, always wearing these old brown cardigans with chemical burn holes in the sleeves, his gray hair sticking up in different directions like he'd been electrocuted. Most teachers would have been fired for showing up like that, but Brennan had this reputation for making kids actually understand chemistry, so the administration let him slide. That Tuesday morning, I grabbed my usual seat in the 3rd row, right next to the emergency shower station, a spot I'd chosen randomly at the start of the year, never thinking I'd actually need to know where it was. Mr. Brennan was already setting up when we filed in, moving faster than usual, almost frantic in the way he arranged glass beakers and metal stands across his demonstration table. His hands kept going to this large black duffel bag he'd placed under his desk. Not his usual beaten-up leather briefcase, but something new that looked like it belonged in a gym rather than a classroom. The windows were already open, which was weird because it was barely 40 degrees outside, and I remember Jenny Morrison actually put her jacket back on. He'd written, "Special demonstration, stay behind your desks," on the whiteboard in red marker, underlined 3 times. When the bell rang and he turned to face us, his eyes had this intensity I'd never seen before, like he was about to share some profound secret of the universe. "Today," he announced, pulling on a pair of thick rubber gloves that went all the way up to his elbows, "you're going to see chemistry as it really is, not from textbooks, but raw and powerful." The first 20 minutes were actually normal. He showed us some basic reactions, copper sulfate turning bright blue in water, that kind of thing. But then he reached for that black bag again, and I watched him pull out 3 unmarked glass bottles filled with different colored liquids. One clear like water, one yellow like urine, and one that was this deep purple, almost black. None of them had the standard school laboratory labels we were used to seeing, just pieces of masking tape with handwritten codes like 7X and Compound J. Katie Dawson, who sat in the front row and always asked too many questions, raised her hand to ask what they were, but Mr. Brennan just waved her off, muttering something about industrial-grade materials and real-world applications. He started combining them in a large flask, and that's when the smell changed from metallic to something sweet and wrong, like rotting fruit mixed with gasoline. A few kids started coughing, and Brian Fisher actually got up to move toward the door, but Brennan snapped at him to sit down, said we needed to see this, that we'd thank him later when we understood what chemistry could really do. The mixture in the flask started bubbling violently, way more than anything we'd seen in class before, and the purple color began shifting through different shades, violet, then red, then this sick orange that reminded me of hazard signs. Mr. Brennan was talking faster now, something about molecular bonds and energy release, but his voice was getting drowned out by the hissing sound coming from the flask. Steam or smoke, I couldn't tell which, started rising from the liquid, forming these weird spiral patterns in the air above the demonstration table. That's when I noticed his hands were trembling as he reached for a 4th bottle from his bag, this one wrapped in aluminum foil like he was trying to protect it from light. The moment he unwrapped it, I saw the liquid inside was moving on its own, swirling without anyone touching the container, and several kids gasped. Brennan's eyes were wild now, reflecting the orange glow from the flask, and he kept saying, almost there," under his breath like some kind of mantra. The temperature in the room had gone up at least 10 degrees in the last minute, and sweat was running down my back, making my shirt stick to the plastic chair. When he poured that 4th liquid into the mix, everything went wrong at once. The flask didn't just react. It erupted like a miniature volcano, shooting a column of blue flame straight up that hit the ceiling tiles and spread outward in a perfect circle. The automatic sprinklers didn't activate, which I found out later was because Brennan had disabled them that morning with plastic wrap and tape, claiming he was preventing unnecessary water damage. The flame wasn't like normal fire either. It clung to the ceiling like some kind of burning gel, dripping these flaming drops that sizzled when they hit the floor. Kids were screaming, diving under desks, and I saw Jenny's notebook catch fire when one of those drops landed on it. The smell now was overwhelming, chemical and wrong, making my eyes water so badly I could barely see. Brennan was backing away from the demonstration table, but he was laughing, actually laughing and shouting something about successful synthesis while the flames spread across the ceiling toward the back of the room where we were sitting. I grabbed my backpack and shoved Katie toward the door since she seemed frozen in place, just staring at the spreading fire with her mouth open. The evacuation alarm finally went off. Someone in the hallway must have pulled it, and suddenly everyone was moving at once, pushing and stumbling over chairs to get out. But here's the thing that still haunts me. As we were rushing toward the exit, I looked back and saw Mr. Brennan pulling more bottles from that black bag, lining them up on his desk like he was preparing for round 2. Through the smoke and chaos, I could see him filling a syringe from one of the bottles, and the liquid inside was glowing, actually glowing with this pale green light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The last thing I saw before someone pushed me into the hallway was him injecting that glowing stuff into another container, while the ceiling continued to burn above him, pieces of melted tile starting to fall like toxic snow. The entire science wing had to be evacuated, 300 students and teachers streaming out into the parking lot, while black smoke poured from our classroom windows. The fire department arrived within 10 minutes, but they wouldn't let anyone back in the building for the rest of the day. We stood in the parking lot watching them work, and I heard one firefighter tell another that they'd never seen anything burn that color before. The flames had turned from blue to this deep magenta that was visible even through the thick smoke. Mr. Brennan had apparently locked himself in the classroom and was refusing to come out, still conducting experiments while the room burned around him. It took 3 firefighters in full hazmat gear to drag him out, and even then, he was clutching one of those unmarked bottles, screaming about how we didn't understand the importance of his work, how he was so close to the breakthrough. They loaded him into an ambulance, but not before I saw the burns on his arms. Not red like normal burns, but silver, like his skin had been replaced with mercury. The paramedic who was treating him looked confused and kept calling for his supervisor, saying he'd never seen anything like it. What really got me was that Brennan was still conscious and talking, telling them they needed to go back for his research notes, that 17 months of work couldn't be wasted. The investigation started immediately, and that's when things got really dark. When the hazmat team finally cleared the classroom 2 days later, they found a hidden cabinet behind the periodic table poster. Brennan had cut a hole in the wall and installed it himself, probably during summer break when no one was around. Inside were dozens of bottles and containers, some from chemical companies that only sold to licensed laboratories, others with labels in languages nobody at school could identify. There were shipping receipts going back 2 years, all sent to Brennan's home address and paid for with cryptocurrency. The principal, Mrs. Lawson, held an emergency assembly where she tried to explain without really explaining, but word got out anyway. Some of the chemicals he'd been storing were on federal watch lists, the kind of stuff that's used in weapons manufacturing. The silver burns on his arms turned out to be from exposure to some experimental compound he'd been synthesizing in his garage, something he'd been gradually testing on himself to build immunity according to the journal they found. But here's what nobody talks about, what the school tried to keep quiet. 3 other students from different periods had been helping him. They came forward after the FBI got involved, scared they'd be arrested if they didn't cooperate. Apparently, Brennan had been recruiting kids who showed exceptional promise in chemistry, offering them extra credit to help him prepare solutions after school. One girl, Madison Crawford from my grade, told investigators he'd been paying her $200 a week to order chemicals online, using fake student organization accounts. She thought she was helping with legitimate research for some university partnership that didn't exist. Another kid, Alex Novak, had been letting Brennan use his family's old barn outside town as a secondary lab. His parents traveled for work and never knew. Alex showed the investigators photos on his phone of the setup, professional-grade equipment that must have cost thousands, bottles and beakers covering every surface, and notebooks filled with formulas that university professors later said were genuinely advanced, just completely unethical and dangerous. The scary part was how normal these kids were. Honor roll students, college-bound, the type parents brag about. They all said the same thing. Brennan made them feel special, like they were part of something revolutionary. The real nightmare came 3 weeks later when Madison got sick. Started with headaches and nausea. Then her fingernails turned that same silver color as Brennan's burns. Her parents rushed her to the hospital where doctors ran every test they could think of, but nothing in their databases matched what was in her bloodstream. Turns out she'd been exposed to whatever Brennan was synthesizing during those after-school sessions, just in smaller doses. Alex developed tremors in his hands that would come and go randomly, sometimes so bad he couldn't hold a pencil. The third student, Jerome Washington, seemed fine at first, but then his parents noticed he wasn't sleeping, like at all. He'd been awake for 6 straight days when they finally admitted him for observation. His eyes bloodshot but somehow still alert, talking nonstop about chemical equations and molecular structures he'd never studied. The doctors had to medically induce sleep, and even then, his brain activity was off the charts, like his neurons were firing at triple the normal rate. The CDC ended up sending a team to our town, setting up a temporary monitoring station to track anyone who'd been in Brennan's classes over the past 2 years. They found Brennan's real lab in January after his landlord noticed a strange residue seeping through the floor into the apartment below. The entire basement of his rental house had been converted into what investigators called the most sophisticated illegal chemistry lab they'd seen outside of cartel operations. He had tanks of gases that required special licenses, a fume hood he'd built himself, and freezers full of biological samples, mostly his own blood and tissue, documenting how his body was reacting to various compounds over time. The walls were covered in equations and diagrams, some in his handwriting, others printed from restricted academic journals he'd somehow accessed. In the center of it all was this massive notebook, almost 500 pages, where he'd been documenting his attempt to create what he called cognitive enhancement compounds. He believed he could chemically evolve human consciousness, make people smarter, more aware, able to perceive things beyond normal human capacity. The students he'd been recruiting weren't just helpers. They were test subjects, and he'd been micro-dosing them without their knowledge, adding tiny amounts of his compounds to the drinks and snacks he'd provide during their after-school sessions. Every reaction, every side effect was carefully documented in that notebook with clinical precision. The school district settled out of court with all the affected families, but the money didn't fix what happened to those kids. Madison's silver fingernails eventually returned to normal, but she developed synesthesia. She could taste colors and see sounds, which sounds cool until you realize she couldn't turn it off and had to drop out of school because the sensory overload was unbearable. Alex's tremors stopped, but his brain chemistry was permanently altered. He went from being terrible at math to being able to solve complex calculus problems in his head. But he also couldn't process emotions normally anymore, describing feelings as distant data points rather than experiences. Jerome never needed more than 3 hours of sleep again, which doctors said would probably shorten his lifespan by decades. As for Mr. Brennan, he's serving 25 years in federal prison, but I heard from Mrs. Lawson that he still sends letters to the school from his cell, pages and pages of chemical formulas and theories, addressed to his promising students. They burn them unopened now. The science wing was rebuilt, but they turned our old classroom into a storage room. Nobody wanted to teach in there, and students would refuse to enter. Even now, 6 years later, whenever I smell anything remotely chemical, I'm right back in that room, watching the ceiling burn that impossible magenta color, wondering how we all trusted someone who was slowly poisoning us in the name of evolution. The spring of 2022 was supposed to be the best time of my life. Senior year, already accepted into college, just coasting through those final months at Lincoln High in Oregon. I was 18, captain of the debate team, and spent most of my free time either studying at the library or helping my mom with her catering business on weekends. Life was predictable, safe, exactly how I liked it. I remember that Monday morning in April when everything started because I'd just gotten my hair cut shorter, one of those impulse decisions that actually turned out great. Walking into Mr. Gibson's history class, I felt confident, ready to present my project on the Cold War. The classroom smelled like old books and coffee, that familiar scent that made fifth period feel almost cozy. About 20 minutes into class, my phone buzzed in my pocket. We weren't supposed to check phones during lessons, but Mr. Gibson was helping another student with their presentation setup, so I carefully pulled it out under my desk. Unknown number. The message read, "The new haircut makes you look older. Very sophisticated. The way it frames your face when you tuck it behind your left ear is perfect." My chest tightened immediately. I glanced around the room, trying to seem casual while my mind raced. Everyone appeared focused on their notebooks or laptops. In the back row, I noticed Lucas Miller barely visible behind his computer screen, but he'd always been quiet, just another face in the crowd of 30 students. The text had to be from someone in this room. They'd noticed my habit of tucking my hair behind my ear, something I'd literally just done 5 minutes earlier. I tried to focus on Mr. Gibson's lecture about the Berlin Wall, but another buzz made my leg twitch. Same unknown number. That green sweater brings out the gold flecks in your eyes. You wore the same one last Wednesday with different jeans. Now my breathing got shallow. I definitely wore this sweater last week, but who pays attention to that kind of detail? My best friend Sophia sat 2 rows ahead, completely absorbed in her notes. I wanted to text her, but what would I even say? Someone was watching me, cataloging my outfits, and I had no idea who. The fluorescent light suddenly felt too bright, making everyone's face look pale and suspicious. Even the motivational posters on the walls seemed to stare at me. I shifted in my seat, hyper-aware of every movement, wondering if whoever sent those messages was watching me react right now. The texts kept coming over the next 3 days, always from different numbers, always during school hours. Your laugh carries across the cafeteria. It's musical. Or you bite your lower lip when you're concentrating on calculus problems. Each message contained observations so specific that I started changing my routines. I stopped eating in the cafeteria, choosing instead to hide in my car during lunch. I wore baggy hoodies even though April was getting warm, but the messages adapted. Hiding doesn't make you less beautiful. The blue Honda in spot 47 suits you. That one made me sick to my stomach. Not only did this person know my car, they knew exactly where I parked. I started arriving late to classes just to avoid walking through crowded hallways, earning concerned looks from teachers who knew me as the punctual student who never missed attendance. By Friday, I'd received 17 messages total. I screenshot everything and finally told Sophia during our free period in the library. We sat in the back corner, behind the oversized geography books nobody ever touched, and I showed her my phone with trembling fingers. Her face went from confused to horrified as she scrolled through them. "We need to tell someone," she whispered, but I was terrified of making things worse. What if confronting this person made them angry? What if they were dangerous? Sophia helped me think through everyone in my classes, trying to identify who had the opportunity to observe all these details. We made lists, crossed out names, but kept coming back to the unsettling fact that whoever this was had been watching me for weeks, maybe months, storing up these observations like some creepy collection. That afternoon in history class, I made a decision to pay attention to everyone, to catch someone looking at me. Mr. Gibson droned on about the space race while I pretended to take notes, actually documenting where each classmate sat and what they were doing. 3 rows back, Lucas Miller had his phone positioned strangely on his desk, propped against his textbook at an angle that faced directly toward me. When I shifted to look at the board, I caught a glimpse of movement, his hand quickly covering the phone screen. My mouth went dry. I turned back around and pulled out my own phone under the desk. Within 30 seconds, a new message appeared. "The way the afternoon sun hits your hair right now makes it look like copper. Beautiful." The timestamp was 2:47 p.m. I watched the clock on the wall, 2:47 p.m. For the rest of class, I sat rigid in my chair, fighting the urge to turn around and confront him. Lucas Miller, I'd maybe spoken to him twice all year, both times just passing "excuse me" in the hallway. He was one of those kids who existed in the background, brown hair always falling into his eyes, wore the same faded band t-shirts on rotation, always had earbuds in between classes. Now every detail about him felt sinister. I remembered seeing him at the vending machines when I bought water. He'd been at the school play where I'd worked backstage. He'd even shown up at the career fair where I'd volunteered at the registration table. All these memories rearranged themselves into a pattern I hadn't seen before, like one of those optical illusions that suddenly shifts into a completely different image. When the bell rang, I grabbed my stuff and practically ran to Sophia's locker. I told her everything in rapid whispers while she grabbed her books for next period. We decided she would walk behind me to my car after school, staying close enough to witness anything that happened but far enough to call for help if needed. The rest of the day crawled by. In every class, I felt phantom eyes on me, even though Lucas and I only shared history together. During final period, I got another text. "Don't worry, I just want to talk to you after school. Alone. I have something important to tell you." That word, alone, made my whole body go cold. Sophia and I had already made our plan, but now it felt inadequate. We should have told a teacher, should have called my parents, should have done something more than our amateur surveillance scheme. At 3:15, the final bell rang. I waited 5 minutes in the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face and trying to steady my breathing. Sophia texted that she was in position near the main exit. I walked out slowly, keys already between my fingers like I'd seen in some self-defense video years ago. The parking lot was its usual chaos. Cars pulling out, music blasting, people yelling weekend plans to each other. My blue Honda sat in its usual spot, and at first, I didn't see him. Then movement near the driver's side caught my eye. Lucas was leaning against the car next to mine, trying to look casual but clearly waiting. He stood up straighter when he saw me approaching and pulled out his phone. Even from 20 feet away, I could see his thumb moving across the screen. My phone buzzed immediately. "Please don't be scared. I know this looks bad, but I need to explain something to you." I stopped about 10 feet from my car, calculating if I could make it to the driver's door before he could reach me. Lucas took a step forward and his face looked different than in class. Desperate, intense, his eyes too bright. "I know about the messages," he said, his voice higher than I expected, words tumbling out fast. "I've been trying to figure out who's sending them to you. I think someone cloned my phone number. They're using my information." He held up his phone, showing me something on the screen, but I was too far away to read it. "Please, just look at this. Someone's been taking pictures of you from my phone when I'm not even holding it. They're using some kind of remote access app. I found these in my cloud storage, hundreds of photos I didn't take." His hands were trembling now, and for a moment I almost believed him. Then I noticed something that made my entire body tense up. His shoes. Black sneakers with a distinctive neon green stripe. The same shoes I'd noticed in the reflection of the library window yesterday when someone had been standing behind me while I studied. "Stay away from me!" I shouted, loud enough that several people in the parking lot turned to look. Lucas's expression shifted from desperate to panicked, and he stepped closer, reaching into his pocket. That's when Sophia appeared, running toward us while already on the phone with 911. Lucas saw her, and something in his face crumbled. He pulled out not a weapon but a crumpled piece of paper, threw it on the ground between us, and took off running toward the woods behind the school. I stood there, shaking, while Sophia reached me and wrapped her arm around my shoulders. The paper on the ground was covered in handwriting. My daily schedule, my license plate number, my phone number, even my work schedule at the coffee shop downtown. But what made me feel sick was the bottom of the page. A detailed plan for how he was going to finally tell me how he felt after graduation, complete with times and locations where he knew I'd be alone. The police caught Lucas 3 hours later at his house, where they found what the detective later described as concerning material on his computer. Not just photos of me, but information about my family, my college plans, even floor plans of my house that he'd somehow gotten from public records. He'd been planning this for months, maybe longer, creating fake phone numbers through apps, using telephoto lenses to take pictures from across the cafeteria or parking lot. The detective told me Lucas admitted to everything eventually, said he thought if he could just show me how much he noticed me, I'd realize we were meant to be together. He'd convinced himself the anonymous messages were romantic, like some twisted secret admirer story. They charged him with stalking and harassment. He was expelled immediately and wasn't allowed at graduation. I got a restraining order that extends through college. Sometimes I still get that crawling sensation of being watched, especially in crowded places. But my therapist says that's normal after something like this. What haunts me most is how ordinary he seemed. just another quiet kid in class that nobody really noticed. Turns out he was noticing everything, recording it all, building some fantasy where I was the main character in his obsessive story. I changed colleges last minute, picked a school 3 states away where nobody knows what happened, where I can just be anonymous in lecture halls with hundreds of students. But I still check reflections in windows, still tense up when my phone buzzes from unknown numbers, still can't sit with my back to a classroom door. I was 17 that year, captain of the volleyball team at Westbrook High in Montana. It was a Wednesday in March 2023, just after our afternoon practice, and everyone was exhausted from the drills coach had us running. The locker room smelled like that weird mix of deodorant and floor cleaner they always used, and the fluorescent lights kept flickering in that annoying way they'd been doing for months. Most of the girls were already heading out, but I stayed behind with Jasmine and Courtney to organize the equipment closet because Coach said it looked like a tornado hit it. We were laughing about something stupid. I think Courtney was doing an impression of our math teacher, when Jasmine suddenly stopped mid-sentence and pointed at the air vent above the 3rd row of lockers. The metal grate was slightly crooked, and there was something dark visible through the slats. At first we thought maybe it was just dust or maybe someone's lost sock that somehow got up there, but Courtney grabbed the wooden bench and dragged it over so she could get a better look. She had to stand on her tiptoes, and I remember holding the bench steady while she reached up and pushed the grate aside. The thing practically fell off. The screws were barely holding it in place. That's when she pulled out this black phone, one of those cheap prepaid ones you can buy at any gas station. It was wrapped in black electrical tape except for the camera lens, and there was this little portable charger attached to it with a rubber band. Courtney almost dropped it when she realized what she was holding, and her face went completely white. We all just stood there staring at it for what felt like forever, none of us wanting to touch it, or even move. Jasmine was the one who finally took the phone from Courtney's shaking hands. She knew more about technology than either of us. Her dad worked IT for the school district. Her fingers moved carefully across the screen, and I watched her expression change from confusion to horror as she opened the photo gallery. There were videos, dozens and dozens of them, all with dates going back about 6 weeks. The thumbnails showed our locker room from that exact angle. You could see the benches, the lockers, everything. Some were from during practice times, others from after school. I felt like I was going to throw up right there on the floor. Jasmine's voice came out in this broken whisper when she said we needed to count how many girls were on these videos, how many of our teammates had been recorded without knowing. We didn't watch the videos, couldn't bring ourselves to do it, but just scrolling through the thumbnails was enough to make us all sick. I recognized myself in several of them, could see my purple sports bag that my mom had gotten me for Christmas. There was one from just 2 days before where I could see Courtney's distinctive neon green water bottle on the bench. The dates and times were all there in the file names, and Jasmine started taking pictures of everything with her own phone, her hands trembling so bad she had to retake some of them. We could hear voices in the hallway, probably the janitor starting his evening rounds, and we all jumped at the sound. That's when it hit me. Whoever put this phone here had been coming back to check it, to download the videos, to change the battery. They had a key to our space access when nobody else was around. I called my mom first, barely able to get the words out between sobs. She was at the school within 10 minutes, still wearing her scrubs from the hospital. By then, Jasmine had called her dad, and Courtney's older sister came to pick her up. My mom took one look at the phone, still sitting on the bench where we'd left it like it was radioactive, and immediately called the police. While we waited, she made us sit in the main office away from the locker room. The principal showed up even though it was past 6 in the evening, and then the vice principal, and soon it felt like every adult in town was there. 2 police officers arrived and took our statements separately. The female officer who talked to me had this gentle voice, but her eyes were hard, angry in a way that actually made me feel a little better. She kept asking if I was okay, if I needed water, if I wanted to call anyone else. The detective who came later was this older guy named Detective Reeves, who looked like somebody's grandfather. He wore latex gloves when he handled the phone, placing it carefully in an evidence bag. He asked us to show him exactly where we found it, and I watched him take photos of the vent, the bench, everything. He measured the height of the vent, noted that someone would need to be at least 5'8" to reach it comfortably, even standing on the bench. Then he asked us something that made my skin prickle. Had we noticed anyone hanging around after practices? Anyone who seemed too interested in our schedule? The truth was, there were several people who had access to the building after hours. The coaching staff, the main janitor, Mr. Franklin, who'd been there forever, and the 2 part-time custodians who worked evenings. There was also the security guard, but he mostly stayed by the main entrance. The investigation moved fast after that. They pulled all the security footage from the building, though apparently the cameras didn't cover the hallway leading to our locker room. Convenient, right? Detective Reeves had the tech department analyze the phone, and they found something interesting. The videos were being automatically uploaded to a cloud storage account every few days, always between 9 and 11 p.m. They traced the IP address to the school's Wi-Fi, confirming it was someone with regular access. What really broke the case open was a partial fingerprint on the electrical tape. See, whoever did this was careful. They'd wiped down the phone itself, but they forgot about the tape they used to wrap it. The detective told us later that criminals always make at least one mistake, and this was his. They ran the print through their database and got a match within hours. It was Kevin Morse, one of the part-time custodians who'd been hired just 3 months earlier. 28 years old, seemed completely normal, always smiled and waved when he saw us in the halls. He was the guy who'd fixed the broken water fountain near the gym last month, the one who'd helped carry equipment when we hosted the regional tournament. I remembered him specifically because he'd made a joke about how heavy our volleyball net was, and we'd all laughed. The police arrested him at his apartment that same night. They found his laptop with all the downloaded videos, organized in folders by date. There were videos not just from our locker room, but from 2 other schools where he'd previously worked. The detective said he'd been doing this for at least 2 years, moving from school to school when he felt suspicion getting too close. The aftermath was surreal. The school brought in counselors, and they had separate meetings with every girl on the team and anyone else who used that locker room. Some parents pulled their daughters from the team. Others threatened to sue the school district. They did a complete sweep of the building and found 2 more devices, one in the girls' bathroom near the science wing, another in the drama department's changing area. Both had been installed recently, probably within the last 2 weeks. The school sent out these carefully worded emails to all the parents, trying to explain what happened without causing total panic. Local news picked up the story, and suddenly there were reporters outside the school every morning. They had to station extra security just to keep them from bothering students. My mom wouldn't let me talk to any of them, and honestly, I was grateful for that. What really got to me was finding out the details during the trial, which happened about 8 months later. Kevin had specifically requested those evening shifts, had volunteered to clean the gym area. He knew our practice schedule, knew when the building would be empty, knew exactly which vents had the best angles. The prosecutor showed how he'd bought multiple phones with cash at different stores, always wearing a baseball cap pulled low. He'd even created a fake maintenance log to explain why he needed to check the ventilation system in the locker rooms. The worst part was seeing him in court. He looked so ordinary, like someone's neighbor or cousin. He got 12 years, but it didn't feel like enough. Not for what he took from us. That feeling of safety, of privacy, of being able to change clothes without wondering who might be watching. You can't get that back with any amount of prison time. The school changed everything after that. They sealed all the vents in the locker rooms, installed cameras in the hallways leading to them, and put in a new keycard system so they could track exactly who entered and when. They hired a whole new custodial service and did extensive background checks on everyone. Parents had to volunteer in pairs now, never alone. Some of the girls quit volleyball entirely, couldn't handle being in that space anymore. Jasmine transferred to a private school the next semester. Courtney stayed, but she changed in the bathroom stalls for the rest of the year, never in the open area. Me? I finished out my senior year as captain, but it was different. We were different. We'd check the vents before every practice, look behind lockers, inspect every corner. That hypervigilance became part of our routine, as normal as stretching before a game. It's been over a year now since we found that phone. I'm in college, playing volleyball for a Division II school in California. The locker room here is newer, brighter, with no vents anywhere near the changing areas. But I still check. Every single time, I check. I scan the ceiling, look behind things, notice if anything seems out of place. My teammates here don't know why I do it. I've never told them the story. Sometimes I wonder if Kevin was the only one, if there are others out there in other schools, other gyms, other places where people think they're safe. The detective told us we were lucky we found it when we did, that some of these cases go on for years without anyone knowing. Lucky. Strange word to use, but I guess in a twisted way he was right. At least we found it. At least we stopped him. At least we knew. That's more than some people get. It happened back when I was a junior in high school, in a year that already felt like it was dragging on forever. I'd gotten used to my usual routine, morning classes, lunch at the same table with a couple of close friends, then coasting through the last periods of the day. That afternoon had started out no different. The hallways smelled faintly of cleaning supplies, the kind they dump in the mop buckets, and the usual chatter echoed between the lockers. By fifth period, I was in the library, half listening to the hum of the printers while trying to finish an assignment I'd put off all week. The first sign something was wrong came when Ms. Riley, the librarian, got a call on the wall phone. I remember her expression tightening as she glanced over at the clock. She muttered a quick, "All right, I'll let them know," and then started moving briskly toward the front desk. Within minutes, the announcement system crackled on, calling several teachers by name. Whispers spread fast. Someone said a student from Mr. Campbell's history class hadn't shown up after leaving for the restroom. At first, it didn't sound urgent. Kids ditch class all the time. But the tone and the voices around me didn't match the usual gossip. By the time the principal's voice came over the PA asking staff to check all accessible areas, the tension had ratcheted up. I saw 2 security staff hurry past the library doors, radios clipped to their belts. A few minutes later, our own librarian locked the side exits, something I'd never seen her do in the middle of the day. My friend Leah leaned across the table and whispered, "Do you think it's serious?" But I didn't have an answer. The air in the library had that heavy stillness, like everyone was waiting for the next thing to happen. About 20 minutes later, a muffled commotion started somewhere down the hall. The sound of footsteps, a door slamming, then one of the assistant principals speaking in a rushed voice. Not long after, word trickled in. They'd found the missing student. He'd been locked inside one of the unused wings of the school, the old science hall that had been shut down years ago when the new building opened. No lights, no desks, nothing in there except bare walls and dust. The part that made my skin prickle was hearing he'd been there for hours without his phone. According to what he told the staff, an older student had convinced him to check something out in there and then locked the door behind him. I'd been down that hallway before, years ago, when they were still using it. Even back then, it had a strange vibe. Narrow corridors with scuffed tile floors, flickering fluorescent tubes, and that stale smell of rooms that hadn't been aired out in a while. They sealed it off when the new wing was built, and now the only entrance was a heavy gray door with a padlock on the outside. I couldn't wrap my head around how a student, especially during the middle of the school day, could end up stuck in there without someone noticing sooner. Later, between classes, I overheard one of the janitors telling another staff member that the boy had been yelling for help for a long time, but the walls back there were thick, and barely anyone passed by that side anymore. Apparently, they only found him because one of the custodians had to go back there to shut off a breaker and thought he heard something faint. When they opened the door, the kid was sitting on the floor, knees pulled up. eyes darting around like he wasn't sure if he should be relieved or embarrassed. By the end of the day, rumors had spread like wildfire. Some said the older student who lured him there was someone who didn't even go to our school anymore, just hung around the edges of the property during lunch breaks. Others claimed it was a prank that went too far, but nobody could name who was responsible. Teachers were avoiding giving clear answers, which only made it feel creepier. I remember walking past that gray door on my way out and realizing they'd already chained it shut again, as if trying to erase what had just happened. That night, I couldn't shake the image of him sitting in that empty, unlit hallway for hours. I kept wondering what it must have been like. No sound except the occasional creak. No way to know how much time had passed. If it were me, I think I'd start imagining footsteps that weren't there, or hearing voices in the dark. The thought of being in that forgotten corner of the building, knowing everyone else was just a few walls away, was enough to make my chest tighten. The next morning, the incident was the only thing people were talking about. Teachers gave vague reminders about staying in supervised areas and reporting suspicious behavior, but no one addressed exactly how the boy ended up in a locked, disused section in the first place. The school resource officer was seen walking around more than usual, jotting notes in a small pad. Even so, the whole thing felt quietly swept under the rug, like they wanted us to stop asking questions. At lunch, I caught a glimpse of the student who'd been trapped. He was sitting at a table in the corner of the cafeteria with a couple of friends, talking in short sentences and barely touching his food. His clothes were clean, but there was a faint gray dust along the edges of his sneakers, like he hadn't bothered to brush it off. I thought about going over to ask what really happened, but something in his posture, tense, withdrawn, told me he wasn't ready to talk. Over the next few weeks, the gray door stayed locked, and the hallway leading to it became a dead zone. No one lingered there, not even to cut through between classes. Every time I passed that spot, I found myself slowing down, half expecting to hear a faint knock or a voice calling from the other side. It was irrational, but the thought crept in anyway. If it happened to him, it could happen to anyone who wandered off alone. Even now, years later, I can still picture that wing exactly as it was described. Silent, stripped bare, and forgotten. Nobody ever found out who the older student was, or if they were even a student at all. The school acted like it was just an isolated prank, but I've never been able to believe that. Someone knew that place was empty, and someone made sure the door was locked from the outside. I don't think the kid was just unlucky that day. I think whoever led him there had done it before, and might have tried again if he hadn't been found.